things aren't good or bad, they just are.
Oh, this is the essence of Mosey. I'm not the only one. So I think what makes life more difficult for people is the judgment they have on themselves about what they believe they're supposed to do or supposed to have achieved, or that this condition or this thing that happened is good or bad, or it should have been good or it should have been badder. And the story of the boy with the horse in the village, I'll tell it in 30 seconds, which is dad gets kid a horse and everybody in the village says, that's amazing. The old man says, we'll see. And then the kid is riding the horse and he breaks his leg, and everyone in this town says, oh, that's so horrible. And the old man says, we'll see. And then the army comes to town to take all of the young men to war, and the kid can't go because his leg is broken. And everyone says, that's amazing. And the old man says, we'll see. And the thing is that as we continue to play out the timeline of life, we can't know if anything is good or bad until the day we die. And the day we die won't matter because we'll be dead. And so it means that at the end of the day, all of the things that occur simply occur. And for me, reminding myself of that I think this is bad or I think this is good, it limits the peaks and it also limits the valleys, and saying this just is. And I think it's, in my opinion, absolute acceptance of the world without casting judgment on it. And it's difficult to do because we all want to make judgments, and we have to make judgments in order to live. We have to approximate, this is a good decision, bad decision. This is a decision that will increase the likelihood that what I want to have happen will happen. But most of the good bads that we have that are coming up are not for our own benefit, are not aligned with our goals. They're aligned with one person that told us something when we were 7 years old, and then we incorporated that and we say, oh, this is bad, because someone else, when we were a kid, like you hit your head and then you look at the adult and the adult says that's bad and you say, oh, it's bad, I'm going to cry now, right? And so there are so many thousands and millions of those tiny judgments that are passed on to us that do not serve us. And so for me, it has been more beneficial to whitewash everything and then actively rebuild what I believe to be good or bad based on those things, but with a baseline reality that none of it is.
It is kind of narcissistic or solipsistic to believe that you know whether a thing is good or bad.
It means you know the future.
You know what the outcome of this is going to be, right? There's this story that I couldn't believe. It was about September 11th. So I didn't realize this, but the night before September 11th actually had quite bad weather, I think. And it meant that people getting home from baseball games got home way later. And then you'll remember the morning of September 11th, it's beautiful blue, clear skies. So had that storm been only 12 hours later, the whole world would have been different, but it wasn't. There's this story of a guy who was going for a meeting, and I think it was his birthday. The lady that he worked with had got him one of these illustration ties, sort of gaudy, hideous thing with drawings all over it. And he was wearing a shirt that clashed with it. And she gifted him this as they had coffee on the morning of September 11th, early, downtown Manhattan. And she says, look, your shirt's wrinkled and it really doesn't go with this tie. Wear the tie. It'll make you feel confident. It's a nice present for you. So he goes back to the hotel. She goes to the North Tower. She dies. He's alive. How on earth are you supposed to say giving that tie was good or bad? You have no idea what's going to happen downstream from the things that occur.
So I know this guy who has a podcast, and years ago, he snapped his Achilles and could barely walk. And so the crazy thing is that many people in that time would have been like, this is the worst thing that could have possibly happened. But because he had snapped his Achilles, he was like, well, I have to make the best of this. I have to do something. I might as well stick with that podcast that I said I was going to start. And then years later, he became a top 50 podcast in the world. And I think an amazing frame is you can make anything that feels circumstantially negative in the moment if you ask the question, what would make this thing the best thing ever? And so I would argue, maybe you would agree, that you snapping your Achilles was probably the best thing that ever happened to you because it got you here. And right now, you probably have your version of the snapped Achilles that's going on in your life, but there's also the version of the top 50 in the world podcast that is waiting for you to take action as a result of your snapped Achilles.
I always had this problem with people who said it was meant to be, right? Because retrospectively, you're kind of taking your agency out of the situation. So for instance, me saying, I'm so glad that COVID happened and shut all of the nightclubs down, which forced my business to close so that I could focus on the podcast, so that I would restart playing cricket, so that I would snap my Achilles, so that I would then move to America and then blah, 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 blah. But I actually think that that's quite a disempowering frame to put around things, because he goes, it totally takes away the difficulty that you had to overcome. You know, if you're in a car accident and you break your femur and you say, it was meant to be because I met my partner who was the nurse that looked after me while I was being rehabbed back to health. You go, okay. Or on the flip side of that, you managed to be sufficiently charming to get a partner while you had a snapped femur in the hospital. That wasn't meant to be. That was your agency. So retrospectively, you want it all to be on you and known. And in advance, you want it all to be completely up in the air and unknown.
I think the high agency frame allows you to break your Achilles and say, what will I do to make this amazing? And I think that's where the magic happens, because then everything serves you. If you're a beginner, just learning, figuring out how to make your first dollar. I'm a co-owner of Skool.com, Skool.com. You can start for free. It's a cool setup that we have to help people do it. And right now, 54.1% of people who start a paid community on Skool make money. So we have put a tremendous amount of effort, Sam and I, into trying to remove all barriers and all friction for people who are getting started so that they have literally no excuses.
It's a way better strike rate than OnlyFans.
Yeah, I don't know what their strike rate is, but we've worked really hard if you saw the amount of detail, I mean, maybe you heard some of this from the podcast, but the amount of detail that went into like where buttons go and what things we remove was actually a big one, was how can we so pare this down so that people don't get overwhelmed? Because the number one reason people cancel or decide not to do something is overwhelm. And so we're like, okay, how can we funnel action into the clearest possible steps that people go step 1, step 2, step 3, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, this actually worked. And so it's been really cool to see the thousands of people who have made their first dollar, which is what I make all my content about it to begin with. And so it's been the ride of my life. It's been awesome.
Okay, I appreciate you, man.